Hello, I'm Erich Pratt with Gun Owners of America. I'm sure you're aware of the horrific shootings in El Paso and Dayton. In a moment, I want to explain what politicians should be doing after these shootings, but first, let me just give my heartfelt condolences to both communities. My heart truly breaks for everyone affected. Life is precious. Life is valuable, which is why life is worth protecting. And as someone who's experienced the loss of a child, my heart aches every time I see someone grieving the loss of a loved one like this. But sadly, these attacks have prompted calls from both Republicans and Democrats for gun control. Nearly every Democrat is calling for universal background checks. They're calling for bans on commonly owned rifles like AR-15s and much, much more. However, what is more concerning is that President Donald Trump has again voiced support for gun control. Today, he stated his support for stronger background checks, which we're not really completely sure what he means by that, but he also threw his support in favor of dangerous red flag laws, which are better known as gun confiscation orders. You may recall that a Maryland man was the subject of a gun confiscation order and was ultimately killed by police last year. And this is why GOA stands against these red flag gun grabs in all forms, because they're incompatible with our Constitution, they're incompatible with the Second Amendment or with real due process for that matter. Also frustrating is seeing other Republicans like Representative Dan Crenshaw support red flag gun confiscation orders as well. He's been sort of an icon in the conservative movement, but he tweeted his support for red flag gun grabs after the shootings this weekend. Look, we cannot forget that guns are not the problem. They are overwhelmingly used for good. And if you look at my USA Today column, which they just recently posted online, you'll see my response to the editorial board's plug for more gun control. In my article, I mention multiple examples of people using guns in self-defense. I talk about the father who used his concealed handgun to stop a mass shooting in a McDonald's, Alabama last year. And the shopper who used his gun to stop a racist gunman outside of a Kentucky Kroger's. Guns are being used to save lives every day. Of course, the well-publicized shootings over the past week are incredibly heart-wrenching. But just as we should not punish sober drivers for the actions of a reckless drunk, neither should we demonize firearms or their owners when they're misused by an evil terrorist. You know, we know because of CDC-backed research, the Centers for Disease Control, that guns are used 16 to 100 times more often to protect life than to take it. So that means there are a whole lot more guns save lives stories that the media is simply not talking about. You know, we celebrate the brave police officers who put their lives on the line and stopped 3 active shooters over the past week. The third one, of course, is the Gilroy, California shooter. But let's not forget that the overwhelming majority of police are in favor of an armed populace. In fact, almost 90% of them, when polled, agree that mass shootings would be reduced or avoided altogether by the presence of legally armed citizens. Really, there are so many examples of good guys or gals stopping mass shooters from all over the country, and the FBI has even documented some of them. But it's worth noting that the very types of firearms the elected officials want to restrict are extremely popular and are frequently used in the defense of life. Take, for example, the Houston man who fired several rounds while fighting off 5 home invaders this year, using his AK-47 as a primary means of defense. Or the Florida man who utilized his AR-15 to fire 30 rounds while fighting off 7 intruders in his home. And then there was the very petite Maryland woman who chased 3 burglars out of her home simply by charging her AR-15. All these victims were facing multiple attackers, which means they needed firearms that held multiple rounds. By the way, I should add one more notable example to this list, and even though he doesn't fit the category of a victim, and by the way, I've mentioned all these examples in my USA Today column, but we shouldn't forget America's favorite retired plumber, Stephen Willeford, who used his AR-15 to mortally wound the monster who opened fire in a church in Sutherland Springs, Texas. Willeford specifically gave credit to his AR-15, well, and to God as well, for helping him place that shot. His AR-15 allowed him to successfully make that long-distance shot and place a round right between the front and back portions of the killer's bulletproof vest. Anyway, despite all these good guys with gun examples, and of course good gals examples too, anti-gunners are crying out for elected officials to, quote-unquote, do something. So here's the question. What should politicians, both Republicans and Democrats and Trump, do after these attacks? Well, first, they should reject all calls for gun control. Gun control, no matter how slight or seemingly insignificant or common sense, will only enable these killers and keep us defenseless. And whenever elected officials do support gun control, GOA is going to be there to oppose it, just like we oppose the calls that Trump made today for gun confiscation orders. The other thing politicians should do is that Congress should immediately take up and pass H.R. 38, the Constitutional Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act. They should also take up H.R. 3200, the Safe Students Act, to repeal gun-free zones. And at the state level, legislatures should immediately take up and pass constitutional carry legislation. That's important, as well as moving to end gun-free zones. You know, these are measures that would, those measures to eliminate the barriers on honest citizens carrying guns and make evil killers think twice before carrying out their evil acts is really important. Look, this is a very difficult time in our country. But let's take action that's actually going to make us safer and freer. I mean, clearly that's not going to be done by restricting guns, but by restoring firearms freedoms protected under the Second Amendment. Anyway, I want to thank you for watching. Please share this video with your pro-gun family and friends. I want to thank you so much again for watching.